All right, welcome everybody to the 2024 Emissary Prime elections. This is our second panel with the next four candidates. We're going to start off just like before with a round of some get to know you warm-up questions. Try to keep it to 30 seconds. A little change in format is you can see that we're streaming a timer. The timer will have a sound at the end, but please watch it as it counts down. We're not going to interrupt you to give you a 30-second or 10-second warning, just to try to not interrupt your flow of your flow of your answers. So, okay, we're going to kick it off with a couple of questions for Bu, Coldplunge, Moneyplane, and Jake, are 4 of our 8 candidates for the 2024 election. I'm going to work in a randomized order. We're going to switch it up a little bit even from yesterday too, so just pay attention and we'll call your name and you'll give the responses. So first, Jake, let's kick it off with you. Since we all love games here, tell us about your 3 favorite gaming genres. So that's 3 favorite gaming genres, and just try to keep it to 30 seconds if you can.
Okay, genres. We're not naming games tonight. Okay.
No, switching it up on you.
RPG. Always been a big fan. Story and lore is always good. Strategy, I like to think and use my brain. And then I would have to go with racing because I've always been a car guy. And any way that I can drive, whether it's an actual car or on my PC or console, is good to me. So there you go. There's your 3.
Thanks, Jake. Moneyplane, you're next. What are your 3 favorite gaming genres?
Yeah, appreciate it. I think my 3 favorite roguelites are probably top of the list here because of the replayability. Always had a soft spot in my heart for RPGs, whether it's MMOs or single player. And then lastly, whatever Rocket League is. I don't know if it's I don't know if that counts as like a sports game or what, but huge fan of Rocket League, so I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Good answers for everybody so far. All right, Coldplunge. 3 favorite gaming genres.
I'm going to say to start, Pokemon. I feel like that counts as a genre. Specifically a big fan of Gen 3. I know there's other games like it, turn-based action, but there's enough games that are Pokemon that I'm going to say that for number 1. Number 2, probably online shooters, Modern Warfare 2, Black Ops, that era was awesome. And then cheeky RPGs for number 3.
All right, you reached the duck. Bu.
All right.
Favorite gaming genres.
All right, let's go. All right, TCGs. Saying that not just because of Parallel, but because I've played Magic for the last 25 years of my life. It's kind of what brought me to Parallel in the first place. FPS as well. Shout out to Counter-Strike, the best FPS ever. And then it's probably a toss-up between action-adventure and RPGs. So let's go with RPGs if I was 10 years younger, and action-adventure now.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Okay, next softball's here to get our vocal cords warmed up. A little fun one Nain cooked up for us. Which games have you spent the most amount of money on in-game transactions? Bonus points if you can avoid naming Parallel. So, Cold, let's start with you.
Well, I'm going to relinquish my bonus points and say Parallel. For sure, it is the most. Outside of that, I went pretty deep in Dota 2 when I was in high school. They had the compendium, which was how they ended up with such massive prime pools for the tournament. So I would buy that, and skins, and then probably cases in CS:GO during that same era.
All right. Jake, what about you? Where have you spent the most in-game money?
I am guilty of being that horrible person who spent enormous amounts of money in a mobile game called Disney Sorcerer's Arena, which was entirely pay to win, and I was that guy that dropped like many thousands of dollars to be the most skilled player, in quotes, in the game.
All right. View.
Okay, so I don't know which one it actually is, but it's either Counter-Strike or Magic Arena. It depends on if you count rolling shitcoin profits into CS skins or not. So uh, I'll let the listener decide.
Sounds good. Moneyplane, what about you? What has attracted the attention of your wallet?
Yeah, I think for the most part, I've tried to avoid transactions in games until I hit EVE Online. They had a third-party gambling site where I would buy Plex, sell it, and then gamble on that site. And I probably sunk way too much money into the process and EVE Online. So
Early degeneracy. Love to hear it. What do you think, Nain or Sean? Should we give him one more softball, or should we get into our easy questions?
That's been enough softballs. I want
All
to go
right,
through.
sounds good. Okay, all right, we're gonna kick it off. So buckle in a little bit. Talk a little bit about business development and just kind of Parallel's position in the space to start off. So, Coldplunge, you're gonna get the first question. So here it is. What do you see as the biggest barrier to onboarding other projects to Echelon? And do you have any proposed solutions? 90 seconds.
I think one of the biggest barriers right now is that a game for game developers, especially in indie studios, is their baby. It's their child. Oftentimes people spent 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Maybe that's an exaggeration. Sometimes it's faster working on a game. And so if it's your thing and then you decide somewhere along the way, hey, maybe I want to get into this crypto thing at a Web3 side. I think that there's a barrier in terms of changing the roadmap because, of course, the fundamentals of the game can be the same, but some sacrifices need to be made. If not in terms of the fun of the game, potentially sacrifices in terms of how long it takes to ship, the types of features it ships with. So I think that is an issue. So the solution potentially is trying to meet people where they are and understanding that Web3 solutions are a spectrum and you can start small and work your way up. And so I think that's probably a more bite-sized and easy way to onboard.
Thanks, Gold. Thoughtful answer. Appreciate that. Moneyplane, you're up next, sir. So you've got some experience in the space with blockchain, DAOs, crypto. So we'd like you to describe some specific work for blockchain products or games that you have worked with and how that experience might correlate to the EP role as you currently understand it.
yeah, thanks. So from a DAO perspective, I was one of the administrators on a DAO that we seeded with our own money, and the goal was to build out IP. We successfully shipped animation products with animators from Archer and voice actors. And then ultimately, we hit a point where it wasn't successful and we had to wind it down. But I mean, learned a ton about DAO governance along the way and having to interact with really difficult personalities. And, you know, the only thing we had in common is we had all put tokens in. So you know, as things progressed and as the mission got a little more fuzzy, I think people wanted out, and obviously it's like an illiquid scenario because who's going to buy these DAO tokens? And so just encountered a lot of problems and had to find solutions, and you know, that's sort of like typical in any business. I would say from the gaming side, it's mostly been so I'm a gaming content creator. I've worked with a lot of games. I've provided some advice for them. I've along the way, some have heeded it, some have not. I have not been in a formal role with any like game studio or anything like that, but have done a lot of advisory work on the side, basically.
Thank you for your answer. Jake, you're up next. What do you think is potentially Echelon's greatest asset or assets, which give it a competitive edge in this space?
It has to be the relationship with Parallel, right? I mean, Parallel is the strongest game in the space. I think that building out that relationship further, making it work as well as it can, is the biggest advertising point for other people that want to join. I think it may also be maybe somewhat intimidating in a way. Like, come join us, we have Parallel. Oh, well, it's great, but also they may feel maybe a little intimidated at first. But that's where our skills as communicators and interpersonal skills come in and say, hey, it's okay, come join us. We'll talk about something that we can work out. But yeah, I think really just sort of piggybacking on what we already have and building it out further. What we have with Parallel, excuse me, and building that out further is, it's such an enormous asset where this space is full of. It's full of a lot of vapor, and Parallel has changed that, and continues to change that, and will keep pushing that. And I think that we need to always push that agenda, without dunking on other projects per se. It's okay for us to say we have this amazing project. Look what we've done. We'll do more going forward in the future.
Thank you, Jake. Let's stay on this roll with looking at Echelon's opportunities and ways that we can grow it. So, Bu, over the next 12 months, where do you see the greatest opportunity for growth within Echelon? And what are some of the key inputs needed to realize that opportunity?
Yeah, so I guess the biggest opportunity would be adding another studio. I think it's something where both, as Jake had mentioned, our great asset in Parallel, and then Echelon's experience and the experience of the EPs kind of individually over the last year to 2 years in working in this space in what is really an emerging industry. Yes, there's been gaming for a long time, but crypto elements and blockchains provide a whole new spectrum through which we can view the relationship between gamers and studios and how value transfers. And so bringing on a new studio would be the biggest opportunity. And I think one of the biggest ways to realize that would be leveraging our expertise in our relationship, but also the ability to kind of like leverage blockchains and tokens and Prime specifically as this really powerful user acquisition and retention mechanism. I think some of the numbers that are coming out, that you see from Parallel, the amount of people streaming, the excitement around the token, the way in which earning Prime sort of like excites people and entices people to stick around, like that value transfer is really powerful, and that's a tool that we have in our tool belt to help kind of propel us towards kind of our vision of onboarding another studio.
Great. Good initial answers around for everybody. Thank you. We're going to go in a randomized kind of continuing questions, so there's no snake, no order here. So looks like the next one's for Moneyplane. So Moneyplane, historically there's been a lot of discussion, and you just brought it up, about the addition of game studios in the future to Echelon. How would you describe the profile of a strong partner candidate for Echelon? And how would you formulate a proper valuation to their inclusion?
Man, that's a big question. It has to be a unique IP. It has to be something that's fun to play. It has to be, a team with a ton of experience. More than anything, though, it just has to be a good fit for what the Echelon ecosystem is able to provide. I wrote a lot about it in my answers, but one of the challenges that I think Echelon faces is it's not blockchain infrastructure. There's a lot of partners that are involved with Parallel, but it's not a blockchain solution. And if we're talking about games being a prime sync, they may have to forego their own token to be a sync for Prime. So you're kind of looking for these games that they want to be a blockchain game. They have something fun, but they don't want to necessarily worry about what chain they're on or worry about their own token. They want a talented team that's done it before. And I think leading with Parallel and being able to bring games into the ecosystem who are like, yes, they've done it right, and we want to do it that way, and we don't have to worry about our own token, right? So it's really just that fit. I think there's a lot of fun games out there, and I think there's a lot of different games can fit the ecosystem. I know there was a question yesterday about, does it have to be a sci-fi game? No, I don't think it has to for Echelon. That's what the branding is right now, but I think it can be much broader than that. So that's sort of my limited answer for this short amount of time.
Thanks, Moneyplane. Jake, you're back on deck. You noted current past contributions to Echelon, and that being elected would enable you to fully commit to this ecosystem. If you were elected, where would you first look to make further contributions to Echelon?
One of the things that I would first like to look on is fixing the current API issues that exist with Defined and with Parallel. I think people having access to data is very important. People want to build stuff. Deck just take deck builders for a simple example. The APIs that we have available right now are not up to date. We had this whole thing worked out with Defined where they were going to build this cool product, and they did, and I used it myself, but that kind of has fallen to the wayside. Fixing things like that to provide tools for the community is something that I think is very important and something that I'm good at. Doing stuff in the back end, especially with data, is kind of my focus, and I think that it hasn't been done. I don't mean to talk ill or anything. I just don't think it hasn't been done as well as it could be, and it's something that I would like to work on and focus and give those tools to people so they can participate in making tools for the community easier. We don't want barriers to making things. You want to provide tools that make this stuff as simple as possible, and that helps encourage people to be participants in it.
Thank you. You. In your survey, you brought up one unique idea, not just one, but one that was not mentioned by others, I meant to say. You mentioned organized play and supporting organized play in your survey or your questionnaire. How do you envision organized play taking shape within the Echelon ecosystem, and what's the value?
Yeah. Okay. So what's the value? I think the value is really obvious if you sort of look around at what are the most widely watched games, and B, kind of like some of the most profitable game studios. It's Valve, it's Riot, it's studios like that. It's games like Counter-Strike, League of Legends, Dota, where they're pulling in money hand over fist because there's a competitive element and a thoughtful, organized play system that allows for players to like kind of commit to this as a full-time job, and for fans to sort of have that expectation that this thing is going to be there. So like that's the value prop. And there's also a big opportunity. I think that the existing TCGs have really fumbled the bag here. Like Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro have totally gutted what organized play means for Magic. Blizzard has done the same with Hearthstone. And so there's a huge opportunity for the parallel TCG to kind of step in there. And so what Echelon can do is kind of support the studio and community, members and community initiatives in hosting kind of very large kind of like tournaments on the studio side, as well as community run events, working with kind of all parties to figure out how these events kind of ladder into something bigger, and then promoting it to the community and the broader gaming world as kind of like a, hey, you can come and play and win and have some consistency here. Come check us out.
Thanks, View. Coldplunge. How do you see Echelon advancing the narrative of what you say is trailblazing the gaming by crypto narrative, and the benefits of this to Web3, of the Web3 elements to gamers? So I'm going to restate that because how do you see Echelon advancing the narrative of trailblazing the gaming by crypto narrative and its benefits to gamers? And then how, building on that, how do you differentiate Echelon from its competitors in that messaging?
That's a great question. I think part of it is continuing to hammer on the fundamentals. One focus that we've had recently on within the comms team is trying to elevate past communications, past information. I think we've seen such a surge recently of new people coming in, and there's a lot to wrap your head around. And so one of the things that is unique about Echelon is the potential for real long-term sustainability of a P2E model. We see the 6-7 prime a day winnings at the top of the leaderboard, and I think that's really exciting, and that's great for flashy tweets. But underneath that, there's a robust system that is thinking about what happens when we're at 100,000, 500,000, a million daily average players. And so I think helping people understand that and giving people the confidence that this model is not going away, and that we're not trying to give people full-time jobs by playing parallel, but it can be sustainable for lots of people to play and earn.
Thanks, Gold. All right, next question is for Jake. In your questionnaire, you note that a component for the longevity and success of Echelon includes encouraging community members to build and contribute. What are some ways to further encourage building in and contributions to the Echelon ecosystem?
Well, that kind of ties into my answer for my last question, right? Providing tools where we can, or where Echelon has already been, there was already a grant for this last tool. So making sure that we follow through with that stuff. Removing barriers and providing tools for people to make things, just it encourages them, because they don't have to make that part on their own, right? We could, I think that just sort of following through with what we've already started there, and then encouraging people to ask for what they need. I think that the grants and the proposal system is pretty underutilized overall. I think that people are a little scared and intimidated by it. I think that we can put messaging out there that encourages people to use that, and rewards them for it. But they need to not be afraid to use it, and the system needs to not be overly complicated. The community can tell you what they need, and I think that listening to them is always important, and we need to. Or we could do a little bit better at just getting their feedback and listening to what they tell us that they want, and then helping them or helping build out the infrastructure for them to accomplish that.
All right. Next question is for Moneyplane. Moneyplane, this is a question about working in sensitive business environments. So here's the question. You note, having worked with clinical trials in other sensitive contexts, while being legally bound not to talk about specific things, but still needing and being able to communicate about broad targets and overall goals. Is it possible you could provide us with an example of how this worked?
Sure, absolutely. So the organization I worked at was a 501c3 nonprofit doing clinical trials, which is like a pretty unique model for actually bringing a drug to market. That meant we had to go get donations to fund the clinical trials, and donors would expect updates on where the trials were at. And so we can't get into specifics around anything, currently in FDA trials. And so we would have to figure out how we were communicating that overall, mission and vision of the organization, whether that was saying like expected approval date under the pretext of things don't always go right. So like putting broader goals out there of like, if everything goes right, we expect something to come to market in 2027, but know that things don't always go right. Or communicating like a direction that the organization wants to go in without necessarily saying how we're going to get there. I know that can be really challenging, but one of the things I truly believe for Echelon, and I've heard like a lot of comments about maybe not knowing what Echelon does or lack of comms, but I do think like having a really strong mission and vision for Echelon, having that North Star that the community can point to and say, this is what Echelon does, is really important, especially if they're on board with it.
All right, thank you. You're back up. This one's about recent, work as an EP and Echelon's work historically. There's been some complaints about delayed delivery on key products like bonds and marketplace. How going forward would you improve Echelon's capacity to build key products it needs and ensure more timely deliveries?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's sort of two sort of factors that I want to touch on here. The first is, you can always hire more people, hire out more contractors, and that is something that I think at this point, the ecosystem is maturing, the game is in open beta, the treasury is healthy, and adding more capacity is a way to kind of expedite delivery of technical products. That's a pretty obvious answer. I think another thing that we can do is I've tried to do this and maybe I haven't done this as successfully as I could, is communicate delays and sort of where the delays may be happening. Building complex products, especially when there are 3 or 4 different stakeholders, each of whom need to deliver a part, is really challenging. And so if one party has a 1-week delay in getting their piece there, your product might be delayed by, more weeks through no fault of your own. And so some of that is out of our hands, but sort of how that is handled and how that's communicated is, something else. And that has been something with, bonds. Like, for example, we are working really closely with Parallel. Parallel had to rebuild certain functions so that the game could work, because their third-party provider wasn't working out for them, and that's just out of our control.
All right, thank you. Cold, circling back to you. Speaking on comms, stated that if you're reelected, you would like to continue champion a compelling message about Echelon and Prime. I'd like to ask you to can you be more specific about what the message is, to whom it is addressed, and what exactly you would be championing.
Sure. So I think that Prime, like I say in my resume and in my little blurb there, it is most fundamentally just a token on Ethereum. We saw some big innovation last cycle where people started attaching pictures to tokens, and that really blew up because all of a sudden it wasn't just a contract on Etherscan, but there was a picture that people could rally around. And I think that's an example of how narrative built on top of fundamentals is really important. And so I think that Prime's a utility token, and for some people that's boring. I think right now, especially in meme coin mania, that can be boring. So taking the fundamentals and making them exciting is key. An example of that is using metaphors like with echoes. We talk about the community being the printers of cards. With Wizards of the Coast or other trading card games, that's all owned by the company, the parent company. And so when you tell someone Prime enables you to take ownership of the supply of a card, and you actually share in the upside and print more, is just one example of how you can make something that's kind of basic more exciting.
Thanks, Cold. Next question is, we're getting into our last couple sets of questions for the round. Is Bew. We have tooling like the Prime bot and others that are effective for the Echelon infrastructure. As a builder in the space, you've provided the community with some APIs and working on APIs and data APIs. If the landscape of the community changes from Web3 majority to Web2 majority, what do you think the new community members would value and need the most?
Ooh, that's a good question. I guess it's probably like the answer is kind of boring here. It's probably the same but different. Like data is the currency, really. So it's just what are your data sources? So if, for example, you go from Web3 to Web2, people care less about things like token throughput. They care about less about things like, prime sunk and all of that good stuff. And they care more about, maybe for example, you know, game outcomes, and something like that. Or, you know, any other sort of more Web 2y interaction, then all you're really, kind of doing as a builder is saying, okay, I'm going to switch my data source from the blockchain to some other data source, and I'm still going to provide those builders with, that information. So it's the way in which people are going to interact and are going to access is going to be pretty common. It's really just kind of what's the upstream data source. I wouldn't be surprised if that changes over time as the game grows. And there's probably some data sources, like cards, for example, or just the assets themselves, where maybe somebody doesn't necessarily care that they are, blockchain, but they just want to know what are the different cards, and we can get that from the chain, even though they're also like apparitions, for example.
Thanks, Pew. Jake, we're back to you. All right. Where do you see opportunities for Echelon to create dialogue with the community? And how has your interaction with the community over the past 2+ years educated you about what they need while balancing that with what you can legally share?
You might hear my kid in the background for this one. Sorry in advance. Um, I think that the main area of communication is just about what is going on and being built. I think that is somewhere where the community has felt that it's lacked. We kind of hinted at it earlier, like about bonds, for example. Being more communicative and vocal about what is going on instead of a month or two in between updates or more is always good. People want to know, and I think that people are okay knowing that there are delays and that things are not going perfectly. I think that people generally would just prefer updates and news, whether they are. They would prefer good, but even if they're not, they prefer to know what is happening. Keep them in the loop. It shows respect to them and their opinions and their their value as a community member. As always, you have to balance what you can say. That's just part of whether you're talking to the community. It doesn't really matter what you're talking to them about. There's always stuff you can and can't say. But telling them as much as possible, especially when it comes to things that have been proposed and agreed on, is paramount to them respecting Echelon and them feeling valued as a community member.
Thanks, Jake. Coldplunge, we're going to stay on this theme of talking with the community here and ask you the following question. In EP, you're quite familiar with the immutable nature of NDAs that bind EPs. And you've spent plenty of time working on communication for the foundation and heard requests for more transparency. So how would you work to balance the request from the community, noting that education is important, while continuing to adhere to the binding agreement?
Sure. I think that the core of the issue people have with our communication is not so much the public facing stuff like the tweets and blog posts. It's more what goes on in here in Discord. I think that when I've seen people get most frustrated It's when they come in and ask something that seems like a straightforward question and don't receive an answer. I talked about this in my questions, but we're really founded on a culture of caution due to a lot of the fallout that was happening when the token was being launched. We tended to lean on safe over sorry, better safe than sorry. And so I think that has kind of stuck, but where we can improve internally, I think, is starting to have some conversations about maybe shifting the line away from caution and more towards transparency, and feeling comfortable sharing our opinions on things. Maybe we have to disclaim this isn't the official stance of Echelon, but when somebody comes in and asks a question about what we think or what's going on, just being able to speak more honestly, however it needs to be disclaimed, I think would be super helpful.
Thank you, Cold. Moneyplane, you're going to get a question from the community. You mentioned you're involved with some other projects and done some content creation. The community has asked numbers of EPs and candidates the same question here. So you're aware that being an EP is a full-time commitment. And as such, would you make being an EP your top priority? And how will you work to get up to speed if elected by the community?
Yeah. So really, like, I had been working full time in biotech up until the end of this last year, when I just sort of was fed up with it and sort of decided to move on. Content creation was always like a side gig for me, and really only became a main gig when I didn't have anything else going on. One of the things I learned in doing content creation is that, like, doing one-off content creation for a lot of the projects coming my way are one-off projects, like do one video and get paid. And none of that's a salary replacement. It's all been for fun for the most part. I've really been looking for an opportunity that's full-time within the space. And I've been looking for an opportunity that I believe in, right? The last organization I went to because I believed in the mission. I took a step back in my role because I believed in the mission. I think the parallel ecosystem is, and the Echelon ecosystem is one of the best Web3 gaming ecosystems that exist. So would be thrilled to be a part of it. And yeah, there's no doubt there that I would be able to commit my full time to it. As far as how I would jump in immediately, my last organization was in psychedelics. I didn't know anything about psychedelics aside from reading a Michael Pollan book at the time. So, it's just by talking to people, it's talking to the current team and understanding where everything's at. It's talking to experts in the space. I have like a pretty good understanding of the lay of the land as far as Web3 gaming, but there's plenty more people to talk to.
Thanks, Moneyplane. All right, we're entering our final round of questions. We should be wrapping up here in about 5 minutes. This is your last question of the night. We asked this last night, but we'd like to hear your answer as well. As a representative of Echelon, you were at GDC. What were your key takeaways about Echelon's position in this space right now?
I would say my key takeaways are that this is a moment of opportunity. How do I phrase this? I think that Web3 feels less dirty, if that makes sense, in the broader gaming community. It's one of those things where if you just stick around long enough, something that seemed abnormal starts to become normalized. And so, there was a specific interaction, or a couple interactions at GDC that I think really cemented this for me, where people are more interested in the IP, and the IP that Parallel has is, I mean, let's be honest, it's Aces. And so you can disarm people who might have, kind of preconceived notions about what blockchains or tokens or NFTs are, by luring them in with the IP, having a conversation with them in an abstract way around, things like digital asset ownership and why that's important, and start to like open people's minds. I don't think it was a secret that, Parallel or other Web3 games were there. I mean, AVAX had a huge booth with a sign that said Web3, that was like Web3 Gaming and Web3 Genius Bar. but I just didn't feel the hostility. And so that says to me that like the broader gaming community is kind of more ready to listen to our message. And so that presents a really big opportunity for Echelon as one of the kind of like paragons of this space.
Thanks, View. Let's see here. Moneyplane. Question goes to you. How would you measure Echelon's growth? And do you think there are any specific regions in the world that Echelon should be pursuing in terms of growth as a priority?
Great question. So, when you're talking about growth in regions right now, that pretty much exclusively pertains to the parallel ecosystem, and I guess I suppose Colony as well, right? And Wayfinder. The move to mobile gaming, I would say, Southeast Asia, it seems like a no-brainer to try to go after that region. I don't know how successful like sci-fi products are there, but this is admittedly this is sort of a tough one because I don't know what I don't know as far as like what Echelon has already built out and what Echelon seeks to pursue. But again, if the goal here is to have a mobile ready product, I would go where the majority of users are already primarily mobile gamers, right? And there's plenty here in the US as well to pursue. I've heard a lot of people say they don't have time to play parallel. They have families, they have kids, but if it was on mobile, they'd play it all the time while watching Bluey or whatever else. So without understanding like what regions you've already had success in and what regions you've already pursued, it's a little hard for me to pinpoint that. But as you build it out, I think it'll become abundantly clear.
Thanks, Moneyplane. We'll get this next question, then we'll wrap up with Cold. Jake, it's important as an EP to be self-starter and work independently, which includes being able to figure out what you may not know and how to research and figure out the answers to those questions. So assess your ability to be a self-starter and to find solutions to questions that you might have.
I think that is something that I excel at, and it's something that I do in my day-to-day life, regardless of what I'm working on. I spent this last weekend learning Linux. I didn't know hardly anything about this. What's that? All right, I don't want to say mean words here. Pain to use operating system. I taught myself a whole bunch over this last weekend. Easter weekend, I might add. I love going out and learning things that I don't know. That does not bother me at all. I am all for that. I can dive right in. It's not a problem, and I enjoy it, honestly. As far as like researching things, I mean, if you looked at my resume, I've been a librarian for almost 20 years, like researching. I've done that just a little bit. One of the most exciting things about the opportunity to work for Echelon is just that, is learning new things. I want to do that, and it would give me the opportunity to do that, and I'm super excited to potentially have that. So basically, yes, give me that. I want that. I like that. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Jake. Cold. Last question of the night. Given your specialty in comms for Echelon, here's your following question. What are your 3 key areas of improvement for Echelon in the coming year? Are there any particular content formats or online channels you think hold promise?
For sure. I think the first thing that we can do is get onto more platforms. Right now we're heavy Twitter and Discord, and that's pretty much it. There's an opportunity to go to Farcaster, to go to Telegram, potentially Instagram. The type of content we would put out there would probably need to be modified to some extent, and so there's thinking yet to do there. We have a presence on YouTube, but that's another area that could use a lot of improvement. I mean, even things like working on thumbnails and getting really into the algorithms and figuring out what type of content would be effective. So spreading out across more channels, I think, is one thing that would be huge. And then I think posting. I kind of alluded to this earlier, but I think continuing to hammer on fundamentals. There's a continuous development of things that happen, but as people join the ecosystem, making sure they understand the basics so that when they tell their friends about Echelon and Prime, they're telling it in a way that's easy to understand. And finally, I think maybe going heavily into video is an opportunity.
Great.
Wish I could
Thanks,
say
Cole.
more.
Yeah, so for everybody here, thanks for your time. Remember that you can go to Election General to follow up on questions, ask new questions, engage with candidates directly. We appreciate your time. Please do reach out to candidates and ask questions in the Discord to further inform yourself ahead of voting. Voting will open on April 7, and there will be multiple pings in Discord and Twitter for that. Thank you all very much. Have a great night.